What's up, guys? Today I want to talk to you about the problem with our corporate media system here in the USA. There's a lot of things that I feel like people don't realize or are quite aware of regarding how our media portrays itself and the world, like in the United States, when it comes to reporting the news. These are private companies, okay? They're motivated by the dollar, they're not motivated by truth. Um, I would say maybe 20 or 30 years ago, they were slightly more credible, but still pretty uncredible. But now more than ever, these are just entertainment channels. They do not care about telling you an objective reality. Um, and we can clearly see that with many instances. I mean, when Bernie Sanders ran, obviously they weren't necessarily excited or even gave Bernie Sanders an opportunity to come speak his mind about his opinions in the state of the United States. And you ask yourself, well, why wouldn't they allow him on or give him some airtime just to talk about what he believes in, and just to give the people a better idea of who he is as a politician, as a person. And that's because these are companies that know that Bernie Sanders is a credible individual. He doesn't take any corporate donations. He's continuously throughout his life, he has denounced media organizations like CNN, MSNBC, Fox News, One American News. And so, if these companies are private, why would they have someone on like Bernie Sanders to get airtime on their platform just so he can talk about legislation that threatens their pockets? Also, why aren't we talking about the fact that we are letting these news media organizations host debates? Why are we doing that? You think they're credible because they wear a suit and they talk and look confident? Someone can look presentable and professional, be confident, even sound very articulate, and still tell you a lie. So just because someone presents themselves as confident and articulate, it doesn't mean that the message that they're trying to convey is based in reality. And I think that's one thing that we fall victim here in the United States. We fall victim to that kind of appearance, to that way of being, because we're socialized from a young age into thinking that a person who presents him or herself in this particular way knows what they're talking about and is always telling the truth. And that's just not the case. These companies are strictly motivated by the dollar and billionaire interests, and basically U.S. state interests. I don't really see how there is much of a difference or a differential between U.S. politicians and billionaires, since they're all in one club. I mean, we see billionaires funding many of these politicians' campaigns before they get into power. That's how they get into power. And then once these politicians are in power, they govern according to billionaire interests and corporations. So, I just think it's important. Like, if you're a millennial or you're a Gen Z, do everything you possibly can to have these conversations with your parents and let them know kind of like the structure and the dynamics behind corporate media in the United States, like Fox News, CNN, One American News Network, MSNBC, CBS, all of these, Apple News. They're going to deliver news content in such a way that is always going to favor, typically, like 98% of the time, corporate interests. And this is a problem because this is our news, and we're exposed to our news on a consistent basis. And I think that it's important that we recognize, what's real, what news is based with objective reality, and what news is simply American propaganda that benefits who? Greedy, corrupt politicians and billionaires and corporations. So I think one way we can start to induce a state of change in the US is having these uncomfortable conversations with our parents, family, friends, and making sure that when we have these conversations, we come prepared and we've thought this stuff out, we've read what we've needed to read, and we're continuing to learn what we need to learn regarding these topics, and being able to have these conversations and be persuasive to the people that matter the most in our lives. I think that's a good way to think about how you can be an agent in the United States, an entity in the United States that it's pushing people towards seeing the truth. If we want positive change for everybody, it's going to start with people talking to each other, deliberation. Obviously, some people aren't worth deliberating with, like maybe with Nazis, probably not, but even some people will give them a shot to try and convince them that their ideology is BS. But yeah, change starts when people start to have the uncomfortable conversations with each other at the appropriate time and place. If we keep living this life of, oh, I want to be polite, or that's too sensitive of a topic, or that's not allowed, or we shouldn't talk about that, or we don't want to offend anybody, you have to understand that that mindset it might be an acute treatment to having friends and family and constructing an environment that is pacifist and peaceful, but it's still fake. It's still living a fake life if you can't have these important in-depth conversations with people that you love and people that matter to you and people that are close to you. And eventually we're going to run out of time where we can't even have these conversations or these much needed conversations with each other, because the world is such a crap show, you know what I mean? And so there's a way we can approach these conversations with our friends and family and our colleagues, that there's a way we can approach these conversations in a way that we're not offending anybody, we're not hurting anyone's feelings, we're not being disrespectful, but we're having conversations that are productive and we're learning from one another. Because when it really comes down to it, many people do agree on a lot. We want affordable health care, we want to see our wages go up, we want to see an end to forever wars, all these things. We want to see take care of the housing crisis. We want to make sure our affordability and our economy is in good shape. These are all things most of us agree on. So the only way we can start to induce that kind of change is to start having these conversations and start normalizing these conversations to, with having them more often and making sure that they count. If we live in a society and a culture that doesn't want to have the necessary deliberation for change, then we're never going to see anything. We're never going to ever see any positive change in our lives. And who knows what's going to happen, because the way I see things going right now, things are just going to continue to get worse. People are going to be significantly priced out of rent, homes. There's going to be people on the street, climate change, global warming, wars, etc., etc. You got the whole issue with data centers hogging up all the water and causing water crises, polluting the air and polluting the water, taking up all the fresh water, contaminating the water. People barely being able to afford rent. 52% of Americans are barely scraping by. That's insane, and that number's only going up. So I think it's worth having these conversations. I just think that, if you feel like you agree with me and you're going to start having these conversations with people more often, just make sure that, especially if you hold my political views, if you're more of a leftist or left-leaning, just make sure you're well-read and you're ready for counter-arguments. And I can guarantee you a lot of those counter-arguments are going to involve a lot of the talking points that we're seeing from corporate media. So just be aware of that, and be prepared, know your shit, and let's change some minds so that we're more comfortable 20 years from now. Thanks.